This video is sponsored by the good and hardworking people of Dingledong City, McPherson County, Nebraska. Hello ladies, I'm Viguple and welcome back to another video. And in this video, I'm giving a PowerPoint presentation on the definitely factual history of the state of Nebraska, United States of America. Now, just like you guys, I always thought that Nebraska was a pretty bland state, corn, conservatives, even more corn. But I decided to dive into the history of the state, and I came up with a lot of surprising things. So surprising, in fact, that I decided to put it into a PowerPoint presentation for you guys to, learn from it. And as such, we start the I now present to you the definitely factual history of Nebraska. Let's start with some pre-colonial history. Before European colonizers first explored the area, for over thousands of years, the Native American nation of Ho'opunipuni used to govern the area. The monarch in power before European takeover was King Alani, nicknamed by European historians as King Orange due to his orange attire. And I know you guys can't really see his orange clothes in the picture given since, this is a sketch, but you can just, imagine that he wore orange clothes. European interaction. In 1548, Spanish explorer Pendejo de la Puta took a solo expedition with 25 other travelers to the areas now known as Nebraska. They most likely traveled alongside the Platte River up until modern-day Scottsbluff. De la Puta noted that the natives didn't bother them and chalked it up to his white skin. Now, modern-day historians reckon that the reason why Pendejo de la Puta wasn't bothered was due to his chronic flatulence and gangrenous nose. Now, this one is interesting since this Spanish explorer didn't really have a lot of impact on this, on Nebraska or Nebraskan history in general, and the only reason why we know that this guy visited was, due to ancient records kept by the Spaniards. Moving on. This is where, stuff gets spicy. Even more European interaction. In 1651, French commander, explorer, and womanizer Jean-Baptiste Pétain led an army of 350 men to fight the Ho'opunipuni to take over their land for France. And the way that they knew that the Ho'opunipuni existed over there was because the Spaniards told them. Anyway, half of his men apparently died from testicular compression and hemorrhoid-related issues while they were crossing the Mississippi River, so that's a big fat L for him. That obviously meant that he could only advance with around 175 men. I still think it's pretty fascinating that these problems while crossing the Mississippi killed exactly half of his men, which is kind of weird and strange if you think about it. The Battle of Wee. I know that's a really weird name for a battle, but bear with me here. The Ho'opunipuni and Pétain initially argued on where the battle should take place until it was decided that present-day Omaha would be where the battle took place. The Ho'opunipuni almost scored a victory until a French soldier named Paul Wee, that's where the name of this battle comes from, managed to assassinate King Alani, who is, who we know now as King Orange, with a sword, scaring the Ho'opunipuni soldiers and making them flee. Pétain stationed 80 men in the area to build a French-dominated settlement in the area, naming it Louis Province in honor of Louis XIV, the Sun King, the guy who said, "Je suis l'État," or "I am the state." Pétain and his remaining men then perished on their way back to France due to a hurricane at sea. So that's another L for them, but when you combine an L with a W, which they got from winning the battle, it kind of cancels out. But if you remember that he got another L from losing half of his men, then you can say his overall experience was pretty bad. New France. France soon acquired the area as part of the French administrative colony known as New France. A nobleman by the name of Martin Vache was appointed to govern the area that contains most of modern-day Nebraska. While this reunited the 80 men left behind with the French, it angered the remnants of the Ho'opunipuni, which were now led by a chief named, and I'm not joking, Iron Balls. Yes, his name was actually Iron Balls. It probably meant something great in whatever language they spoke, but in modern context, it's extremely hilarious. The Baguette Rebellion of 1720. This apparently took place in a city called Baguette in New France, and I don't know why. And it seems so French that the French would name a city Baguette. Anyway, in April 1720, a rebellion orchestrated and led by Iron Balls saw numerous French officials maimed or slaughtered by bows and spears. It took place in Baguette, which is present-day Norfolk, and was only extinguished when a woman threw a splinter at Iron Balls in defense, causing his clothes to tear and humiliatingly reveal to the public that he did not, in fact, have iron balls. Now, the only reason why we know that Iron Balls' clothes were torn and he was humiliated in front of the French was because the French thought it was so hilarious that they had to write over 1,000 books, half of which exist archived today about this incident. Anyway, what's next? Yes, the Louisiana Purchase. And I put purchase in between quotation marks because it wasn't really a purchase. After the United States bullied France into giving away the Louisiana Territory in 1803, the land that would become Nebraska was now part of the Missouri Territory under the rule of the United States. The fact that they didn't have the privileges that states like the Carolinas had angered both the natives and the newly moved in white population of the area. And over here we have Richard Bootlicker, who's the 4th President of the United States, who oversaw the creation of the Missouri Territory. Now we have the Nebraskan statehood moment of 1821. Nebraskans finally cracked the mounting tension and launched a movement to recognize the area that they lived in as a state under the United States, starting from the 20th of April 1821. When asked whether the state is to be a slave state or a free state, because back then there were such things as slave states and free states, Nebraskan statehood movement leader Channing Skipper Gumbo, Skipper being his nickname, famously replied with "Off to hell, you wretch," and struck the Enquirer with an iron bar. We still don't know where he got the iron bar from or why it was hiding in his clothes, but Skipper Gumbo just so happened to have the iron bar. Statehood and repercussions. Nebraska became a free state on September 31st, 1821, and immediately held elections for governor. Skipper Gumbo, as an independent candidate, scored a legitimate win against Republican candidate Dick Moose with over 231.5% of the votes in his favor. Statehood and repercussions continued. Now, this is where things get a bit controversial and stuff, because upon assumption of governor, Gumbo suspended the ratification of the Constitution of Nebraska and declared himself the High Monarch of the Kingdom of Nebraska. Crazy, am I right? He then declared an official secession from the Union in 1825 and started ruling the independent Kingdom of Nebraska with an iron fist. This extremely irritated the American government, but they were preoccupied with whatever was going on that would soon start the Civil War. And I know that the Confederacy seceded from the Union, but what was so special about the Nebraskan secession is that Nebraska Nebraska never really, supported slavery. They supported most of the stuff the Union was about, and they also didn't bother. They also didn't, bother the Union a lot. And over here, you guys know I'm really into flags. So here we have the flag of the Kingdom of Nebraska, which existed from 1825 to 1865, and now you will soon learn why it only lasted for like 40 years. Nebraska during the Civil War, the Kingdom of Nebraska, now extremely poor due to a lack of resources, since corn and labor aren't exactly good sources of labor, sent 30 of its soldiers down to fight the Union in the Civil War, in hopes that it would appease the American government and compel them to send money over to the kingdom. All 30 soldiers were blown up by numerous barrages from a 20-pound Parrott rifle cannon. If you don't know what a Parrott rifle cannon is, it was a pretty widely used cannon used during the Civil War, during that era, and yeah, it could deliver quite a force, if you ask me, and it's no wonder why all 30 soldiers were blown to pieces by it. And if you look at the background, you see I uploaded a photo of the last photo taken of the Nebraskan soldiers alive. Annexation back into the US. Now this is where you find out how the Nebraskan kingdom ended in 1865. After a humiliatingly short life of just 40 years, the US Army annexed the entirety of Nebraska back into American territory on the 1st of June 1865. The annexation was notable since there was little to no resistance from the Nebraskan side. Gumbo, who had reigned supreme, then was captured, tried, and sentenced to death via exsanguination. The Omaha dust storm of 1890. Everything went mildly okay for Nebraska as a state up until June 1890, when an unexpected massive dust storm covered all of Omaha and most of Lincoln, which is the capital of the state of Nebraska. This caused over 2,000 people to perish from suffocation and erotic dissatisfaction. This dust storm is regarded as one of the mildest ecological disasters to happen in American history. And over here you have an extremely shaky photo taken by an enthusiast named Ulrich Masters. I couldn't even find a picture of him on the internet. The 1902 elections for Nebraskan governor. Elections for a new Nebraskan governor started in 1902 after the previous governor conveniently passed away from an extremely powerful wedgie. The candidates were Republican politician Oliver Lewis and Democrat statesman Johnny Crack. Crack won with 52% of the votes, but then got assassinated by a bad bout of diarrhea. I guess you could say that he had a lot of Taco Bell. Excuse my bad joke. Anyway, Crack being dead meant that Lewis, who was a Republican candidate, somehow managed to become governor. Now, I consider this strange thing, since, if a governor died, you would have a replacement of him, which is not the guy he went up against during elections, but whatever. Reactions to the beginning of World War I. Okay, now we're coming up into the modern era. The people of Nebraska from 1940 up until the involvement of the US in World War I, which is in 1917 if my history is right, were outspoken critics of the Allied powers and claimed to embrace the Central Powers of Germany and Atlantis. Pro-German Nebraskan journalist Jeremiah Gall was even caught in 1915 drinking and flirting with 5 German immigrant women wearing mock German army uniforms. This spicy scandal then led to the downfall of his career and wound up in him committing suicide by blowing himself up and killing 3 cows and 4 ears of corn in the process. As you can see, this is a really spicy scandal that ended in an extremely spicy suicide. And over here we have a rudimentary sketch of Gall and his suicide weapon. People still don't know how he managed to blow himself up, since you wouldn't really assume a journalist back then to have access to a bomb. You could assume that he was carrying dynamite. American entry into World War I. The American entry into World War I in 1917 resulted in over 10,000 young Nebraskan men enlisting in the army, as the pro-Central consensus in the state suddenly became pro-Allied and, most importantly, pro-American. Nebraskan forces were most famously stationed in Switzerland throughout most of the war due to the soldiers fearing death and loving Swiss food. To this day, the Swiss government wants $30 million in compensation for the inappropriate graffiti left by Nebraskan forces. Over here you can see them making a pit stop in Missouri right before getting sent to Europe. Now we can see the effects of the Great Depression on Nebraska, because the Great Depression hit Nebraska hard, with crops being priced for less than $1 per pound, and over 65% of men unemployed and drunker than a horse. This mass unemployment and a general sense of hopelessness led to a new extreme sport called tractor rodeo emerging. This weird sport saw unemployed farmers riding tractors like a horse in a rodeo. I don't know if Nebraskan farmers still do this, but it is a pretty unsafe thing. This led to numerous deaths, most famously Bill Carstone's death from getting squished under a tractor pileup. And over here in the picture we can see Bill Carstone's gravestone, which is coincidentally the 3rd most interesting monument in Nebraskan history. World War II, the rise of the Nebraska Navy. Due to the threat of naval attacks from Japanese in World War II, the Nebraskan governor, forgetting that Nebraska is landlocked, which is pretty stupid of him, organized a well-trained navy with the help of local millionaire Alois, or I think his name is pronounced Alois, I think it's Alois. Yeah, it's probably Alois Anderson. It was equipped with 60,008 men, 13 river monitors, which river monitors are basically, warships, but instead of sailing in seas and oceans, they sail in rivers, and 2 radio-equipped airplanes. It mainly patrolled the Nebraskan waters, but still kept advancing the technology and manpower even after the end of World War II. They are still operational as of today. And over here we have Alois Anderson, the millionaire who funded the Nebraska Navy, and we have the emblem of the Nebraska Navy. I have a friend, his name, let's call him Evan. He is very interested in American military history, and he proudly states that the Nebraska Navy is his favorite part of American military history, and I have to agree with him. This is really interesting. Nebraska during the 1950s, and now here's where things start getting a bit more spicy. After the end of the war, Nebraska started to show outright signs of feeling communist, with the governor of Nebraska, George Glucose, which, might I add, is a pretty stupid name, wearing an ushanka during a speech, and many Nebraskans flying the flag of the USSR along with the American flag. This fueled into the Red Scares for the rest of America, with many government-sent spies thwarting or peacefully dispersing communism-related gatherings using an odorous gas-releasing bomb. Now, as you see here, Nebraska suddenly decided to become communist, which is pretty weird. And over here we have the commie governor, George Glucose. What a traitor. The Red Purge of Nebraska. Excuse the really disturbing picture on the right of the screen, but anyway, due to fears of a communist uprising in Nebraska, the FBI conducted a series of operations in which they either publicly humiliated prominent communists in Nebraska to make them lose support or assassinated them. These operations went from 1959 and ended in 1963. The classified information about these operations were leaked by an anonymous internet troll in 2017. Over here we have a picture from the funeral of pro-communist journalist Ralph Raleigh Hemmings, whose face apparently got melted by a government-approved pipe bomb. Now here's where stuff starts to get interesting. The Nebraska-Wyoming War. In 1965, a surge of opinions regarding neighboring state Wyoming became known, with almost 98% of Nebraskans proclaiming that Wyoming should become part of Nebraska. This persuaded the Nebraska Navy to try and invade Wyoming through the North Platte River, with the help of the Nebraskan state government on June 29, 1965. This initiated the Nebraska-Wyoming War, which was mostly fought between the Nebraska Navy and both retired and active soldiers from Wyoming. On the top we have a map of what it would look like if Nebraska managed to annex the entirety of Wyoming and, unite Wyoming with Nebraska. And underneath we have a picture of a famous river monitor owned by Nebraska named Orbitally, who was about to engage with forces on Wyoming land in the Battle of Wheatland. And what exactly went on in the Battle of Wheatland? Well, I'm going to show it to you right now. The Battle of Wheatland. The Battle of Wheatland was the first major battle in the Nebraska-Wyoming War. It took place in Wheatland, Wyoming, where it was fought between Nebraskan river monitor Orbit Lee and Wyomingite soldiers located on the shores of Chugwater Creek on October 23, 1965. Casualties of the battle include 200 out of the 1,200 total Wyomingite soldiers fighting, and around 20 crewmen on the monitor were fatally shot or cannonballed. The battle lasted for an hour before Nebraska ultimately won and kept advancing westwards into Wyoming. And over here we have the battlefield after the war, where you can see a lot of the artillery damage over here. But the river is not in view, if you're wondering why you can't see the river. Now we have a really grim and dark part of Nebraskan history, Nebraska-Wyoming history, and that's the Casper Massacre. Once the Nebraska Navy managed to reach further into Wyoming, they stationed 2,500 soldiers in Casper, which is a major city in Wyoming. These soldiers then proceeded to massacre over a sixth of the entire population of young working men in Casper from November 13th, 1965 to January 5th, 1966. It was dubbed as the Casper Massacre, and it is still unrecognized by the states of Nebraska, Michigan, Alaska, and Florida. And over here we have the gravesite of the massacred men in Casper, Wyoming. Now we have an example of how Wyoming did not manage to become part of Nebraska. Wyoming defends itself. The American government, wanting the war to stop due to the toll it was exerting on tourism and industry, supplied Wyoming with a few troops of skilled personnel and a shipment of ammunition and weapons to defend itself. Led by General Buford Amplifier, my hero, this defensive move undid much of the progress that Nebraska had managed to achieve in less than half the time. Nebraska, feeling butthurt, made empty claims about having built a nuclear weapon that they were going to use against Wyoming. The Valentino atomic bombing. The US government, not realizing that the nuclear threats by Nebraska were fake and not based on anything, panicked that the communist powers at that time had somehow given a nuke to Nebraska. To make sure that Wyoming doesn't get nuked, the government calculated that the nuke was probably being stored in Valentino, Nebraska. So on the 29th of April, 1966, the US government dropped a nuclear bomb on Valentino to disintegrate the supposed other nuke. Now we have a continued story of the Valentino atomic bombing. Due to Valentino being extremely far away from other populated areas and only having a population of around 30, the nuke only killed 28 confirmed people, who would be later named by the US government as undercover communist spies. This bombing prompted the Nebraskan state government to surrender and abandon the annexation of Wyoming, while also having to pay Wyoming over $3 billion in reparations. President Lyndon B. Johnson is reported to have uttered the words "atom bomb baby" when he received news of the successful explosion in Valentino. Over here we have a picture of then Nebraskan Governor Geronimo Keenes apologizing for the war and the destruction it ensued. Now we have Nebraskan rebuilding. The US government signed the Treaty of Valentino with the Nebraskan governments in 1967, in which the most important term was that Nebraska must abandon and purge all extremist and communist ideologies in exchange for funding and infrastructure repair. Governor Keenes had stepped down after political pressure, and a Republican politician, Julian Humphrey, was sworn in as the state's first and to date only female governor. The 1981 Barkley tornado, another ecological disaster. A tornado struck the town of Barkley, Nebraska, around 7:01 p.m. on June 31st, 1981. It ripped through the area and severely damaged numerous buildings while also demolishing an abandoned apartment complex. Over 45 people were killed from blunt trauma and being turned into gory confetti by being pushed through a wire fence. It is regarded as one of the calmest tornadoes to ever strike Nebraska. The 1995 Viguple brothel bombing. Ever since the 1950s, a tiny communist terrorist group named the Red Terrors of America, also known as the RTA, had been growing from just one member to 3 members. In 1995, they decided to make their demand of a communist America known when they decided to plant an unidentified explosive in what they presumed was a school building in the city of Viguple. The building was a brothel, actually, filled with prostitutes. The explosive detonated at around 3:25 p.m. on November 21st, 1995. It killed over 15 prostitutes and injured over 30 people. This led to the FBI leading a raid into their headquarters and arresting all 3 terrorists. They would all be sentenced to death in 1997. The 2012 Simpsons ban movement. In 2012, a Christian movement led by activist Gertrude Lunenburg protested the existence of the show The Simpsons, claiming that it spread Satanism and communism to younger generations. Lunenburg herself got on numerous talk shows and stated evidence why The Simpsons was satanic and should be banned. Ultimately, her campaign failed as The Simpsons still continued to air. The writer of the show tried to parody her in a proposed episode, but they stopped when Lunenburg threatened to sue them for the love of God. Anyway, we have a picture of Lunenburg, and I would add a picture of the animated Lunenburg, where the animated Lunenburg to actually exist. As you guys know, I'm a pretty big flag guy, so I should add a little bit of flag history in there. Anyway, the Nebraskan flag change. In 2014, the Nebraskan government held a contest to find a new flag to replace its then flag, which is the one you see right here, the one with the white star and the red, white, and green bands. After 3 months of contest, the Nebraskan government elected the blue background and yellow seal design that we know today, which is this really bland looking flag that we see down here. This angered the supporters of the old flag, who held an extremely huge protest on Reddit. And since it happened on Reddit, it didn't really do anything. The 2021 Garrison Blizzard. During the winter months of November to December in Nebraska, the north-central town of Garrison started to receive harsh winter winds and intense snowfall. Then, during the week of 22nd November up until 28th November, a severe blizzard struck the town of Garrison and nearby settlements. Due to Garrison being a much popular place for people to live, the blizzard injured 200 and killed 81. Of over 70 acres of cornfield was destroyed by heavy snow, and over 40 people had to dig themselves out using their fingers, causing a lot of frostbite. Now, this is probably my favorite part of my PowerPoint presentation, the 2023 Weird Al fan rise. Now, as you guys know, I'm a really huge fan. You guys may not know this, but I'm a pretty huge fan of the popular musician Weird Al Yankovic. And in 2023, the songs of famous parody and comedy musician Weird Al Yankovic started to gain a fan base in Omaha. This love for songs such as My Bologna, Hardware Store, and Amish Paradise spread to other major Nebraskan cities such as Lincoln, Fremont, North Platte, etc. This led to Nebraska being known as the Weird Al State, and soon led to the musician himself visiting the state in July and writing a song about it called Nebraska Sucked, which generated a ton of positive Nebraskan responses and has been listened to over 3 million times. I love the song Nebraska Sucked. It goes to something like this: I hate going to Nebraska, it sucked a lot. I forgot the next line, but anyway. In conclusion, what sort of knowledge did we gain from this PowerPoint presentation? Nebraska and its history are pretty meh. It's a state that embodies the phrase 3 out of 10 with 1 point added for the sake of pity. Anyway, thanks for watching, nerds, and don't miss our next show. Next up at 7 p.m., the almost believable history of Gooberdapple, which is a city in New Hampshire. You won't believe what goes on there. Thank you for watching my PowerPoint presentation, and I hope y'all have a great day, and I hope y'all learned a little something about Nebraskan history. Goodbye, gentlemen.